Alright travelers, listen up! If you've been waiting for the perfect chance to snag some rare Genshin Impact characters you missed, now's your time to shine. Chronicled Wishes are back with the Remembrance of Jade and Stone event in version 5.3, and this one's all about celebrating Liyue's finest. Think of it as a second shot at some of the best event-exclusive characters. Just don't waste your wishes on standard banner units that won't do much for your team. You want power, synergy, and most importantly, fun. So let's talk about who's worth pulling. Of course, the star of the show is none other than Xiao, Liyue's strongest Anemo DPS. If you love fast-paced combat and big plunging attack numbers, he's an absolute must-have. But he's not the only one. This banner is packed with some fantastic characters that can seriously boost your roster. Whether you need a solid DPS, a top-tier support, or just want to expand your Liyu collection, we're breaking it all down so you can make the right choice. Let's get into it. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. Kiki, the character who haunts every Genshin player's 50-50 like a ghost you just can't exorcise. If you've been playing long enough, chances are you've seen that little zombie pop up on your screen at the worst possible moment, right when you were hoping for an event-limited 5-star. And let's be real, that alone is enough for most players to hold a grudge. But even if we set aside the emotional trauma of losing a 50-50 to her, Qiqi's actual gameplay doesn't do her many favors either. Now don't get me wrong, she is a healer. But in a game where healing isn't everything, she just doesn't bring much else to the table. Her elemental skill does heal over time, but the cooldown is ridiculously long, making her unreliable in clutch moments. Her elemental burst is a big heal, sure, but with how slow her energy regeneration is, you'll be waiting forever to actually use it. Meanwhile, other healers like Kokomi, Jean, and even Barbara exist, offering not just better healing but also extra utility like hydro application or crowd control. At the end of the day, Qiqi's biggest problem isn't just that she's a bad character, it's that she's an outdated one. She was designed in a time when healing was considered a top-tier mechanic, but the game has evolved past that. These days, shields, damage reduction, and even lifesteal mechanics make pure healers feel unnecessary. And with so many newer characters doing more with less, Qiqi just doesn't have a strong place in most team comps. So unless you're a diehard fan of adorable zombie girls, or you just really love cryo healers, there's almost no reason to actively pull for her. Keqing is a solid electro DPS, but let's be real, she's not the best option to spend your hard-earned pulls on in the Chronicled Wishes banner. Why? Because she's a standard banner character. You can get her anytime from the permanent banner or even randomly when pulling for limited characters. Instead of using your Primogems on her, it's usually better to aim for rarer, time-limited characters that bring something fresh to your roster. But if you're a huge Keqing fan or really want to max out her constellations, then go for it. Now, if you do decide to build Keqing, be ready for a bit of a challenge. She needs a solid balance of critical damage and attack stats to really pop off, and that's not always easy to achieve. That said, her elemental burst is pretty fun to use. It's fast, has good AoE, and can be spammed thanks to its quick charge time. In modes like Spiral Abyss, where speed is key, she can definitely hold her own. And if you're feeling experimental, you can even build her as a physical DPS, though it's a little trickier since her elemental skill cooldown slows down her flow. So, should you pull for Keqing? If you love her playstyle or want to push her damage output to the max with constellations, then sure, go for it. But for most players, it's better to save those Primogems for characters who won't be coming back anytime soon. Keqing is always an option, but those limited time units? Once they're gone, at least until the next rerun. Oh boy, child. He's one of those characters that had his time in the spotlight, but let's be real, he's been outclassed. If you've got Yelin, Ayato, Nuvolette, or even Mualani, you're probably not thinking about pulling for him. It's not that he's bad, but the power creep in Genshin Impact is real, and Child just doesn't hit the same way anymore. That said, he's still a fun unit to play thanks to his unique stance-switching combat. He can go from range to melee in an instant, which keeps things fresh, but the long cooldown on his elemental skill can be a deal-breaker if you're not careful. That cooldown is honestly his biggest flaw. Once his melee stance runs out, you're stuck with a bow, which isn't ideal unless you love spamming charged attacks. And let's be honest, most players don't. But credit where it's due, Child still has some serious synergy with off-field damage dealers. Pair him with Shangling or Raiden, and you've got yourself a Vaporize or Electrocharge machine. His Elemental Burst is also one of the most satisfying in the game, especially when you're clearing waves of enemies. The Riptide effect makes everything explode, and if you time it right, it's chaos in the best way possible. So, should you pull for him? Unless you're a child main or just love his character, probably not. There are simply better Hydro units out there now. But if you already have him and know how to work around his cooldowns, he's still a strong option for Spiral Abyss, especially in multi-target fights. He's just not the meta king he used to be. Still, if you enjoy fast-paced, aggressive playstyles and don't mind a little cooldown management, Child can still be a blast to use. Oh, Shenhe? If you're running a Cryo DPS, she's an absolute game changer. Her buffs make characters like Ayaka, Ganyu, and Ryothesly hit even harder, stacking up that sweet cryo damage. But here's the catch. Natlin hasn't really given us a top-tier cryo DPS yet, so if you're hoping for someone new to pair her with, you might have to wait. That being said, if you've already got one of those cryo powerhouses built, Shenhe is basically their best friend, making their bursts and skills even deadlier. But Shenhe isn't just about cryo. Her Elemental Burst also shreds enemies' physical resistance, which is a huge deal for characters like Eula and even King if you're running her as a physical DPS. So, while she's known for her cryo buffs, don't forget she can also make those hard-hitting physical attacks land even harder. Plus, her Talisman Spirit deals off-field cryo damage, meaning you can keep triggering Freeze or Superconduct while focusing on another character. So, is she worth pulling? If you've already invested in a strong cryo team, absolutely. Shenhe takes them from great to broken tier levels of damage. But if you're still waiting for a new cryo main DPS in Natlan, you might want to hold off and see what's coming next. Either way, she's an amazing support. And if you love cryo-based teams, she's a solid long-term investment. Baizhu is one of those characters that just fits into so many different team comps. And it's honestly impressive how flexible he is. You want healing? He's got it. Need some extra shielding? He can do that too. And of course, he applies Dendro like a pro, making him an amazing pick for teams that rely on elemental reactions. While he can do some damage, let's be real, his best role is as a support. With just a little investment in HP and energy recharge, Baizhu becomes a reliable healer and reaction enabler that keeps your team alive and your enemies suffering. That being said, his shield isn't exactly top tier. Compared to someone like Zhongli, who basically turns you into an unbreakable tank, Baiju's shield is more of a backup plan than a full-on defense mechanism. It works, but you'll need to be a little more careful when taking hits. On the plus side, he's pretty easy to build. You don't need to stress over crazy crit ratios or fancy artifact sets. Just stack that HP and energy recharge, and you're good to go. If you're looking to maximize his Dendro application, pairing him with Natlan characters like Mualani and Mavuika is a fantastic option. They open up some fun reaction possibilities and make him feel even stronger. Overall, Baizhu is one of those characters that may not be the flashiest, but he's incredibly valuable in the right hands. Whether you need a healer, a shield, or just a Dendro battery, he's got your back. Ganyu has been a fan favorite in Genshin Impact for years, and for good reason. She was once the undisputed queen of cryo damage, with her insane charged attack multipliers and powerful AoE burst. But let's be real, times have changed. With characters like Ryothesly and Ayaka offering more variety in cryo playstyles, Ganyu isn't as dominant as she used to be. That doesn't mean she's fallen off though. If you love precision shots and freezing enemies from a distance, she's still an absolute beast, especially in boss fights where her single target damage truly shines. The best part? You don't even need to rely on her skills much. Just charge up those Frostflake arrows and you'll be melting through enemies. Well, technically, freezing them. Her Elemental Burst is also super useful, letting her apply cryo off-field and enabling freeze teams to work like a dream. This makes her a perfect fit for teams centered around Hydro supports. And with recent additions like Mavuika and Chaska, there are even more ways to get creative with elemental reactions. At the end of the day, Ganyu is still one of the best cryo DPS units if you enjoy her unique playstyle. She may not be the only top-tier option anymore, but she brings something different to the table. Whether you're running a classic Morgana freeze team or experimenting with newer reactions, she's a character that remains relevant and rewarding to play. So, if you've been sleeping on Ganyu just because newer cryo units exist, maybe it's time to dust off that Amos's bow and give her another shot. Xiao is an absolute beast in Genshin Impact, and the best part? You don't have to break your back trying to build him. He's all about those high-flying plunges and insane anemo damage, but there's a catch. His elemental burst eats away at his HP like crazy. That's where the Marechaussee Hunter artifact set comes in clutch. Every time Xiao loses HP, his crit rate skyrockets, meaning you can focus purely on stacking crit damage and attack to turn him into an absolute monster. Pair this with a solid healer, and he'll be wrecking everything in sight without a care. Now, if you want to push Xiao's damage even further, reducing enemy elemental resistance is the way to go. Since swirl damage scales off elemental mastery, combining him with a character that can shred resistances, like a Viridescent Venerer user, can seriously amp up his numbers. And let's not forget his rapid plunges make him harder to hit, which means less worrying about dodging and more time styling on enemies. If you've ever wanted to feel like a one-man wrecking crew, Xiao's got you covered. Another solid artifact option? Vermilion Hereafter. This set boosts attack whenever you lose HP, which, let's be real, happens all the time with Xiao's burst. So, whether you go with Marechaussee for crazy crit rate, or Vermilion for non-stop attack buffs, Xiao stays a top-tier DPS. Just make sure you have the right supports to keep him alive, and you'll be tearing through enemies like they're made of paper. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.